The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 28th chapter. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descending from heaven came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him, took hold of his feet and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers and sisters to go to Galilee. There they will see me." This is the gospel of the Lord. On December 3rd in 1967, in Cape Town, South Africa, Dr. Christian Barnard performed the first person-to-person heart transplant. On Christmas Eve 2005, a couple in my congregation that I was serving at the time in a small town of 3,000 people, Mike and Maria, were sitting near the front of the church with their two sons, Tommy and Jason. Jason was just 6 months old. As candlelight was moving from person to person in the lighting of the candles through the sanctuary, and we began to sing Silent Night, I noticed Jason, at just 6 months old, reaching for the light of his father's flame. It is a moment in time etched in my mind. 3 weeks later, Maria called me at 3 o'clock in the morning, asking me to come to Children's Hospital to do an emergency baptism on Jason. His lungs were not functioning and he needed a lung transplant. It was unlikely they would find a donor in time. In the ICU, I baptized Jason with water in a medicine cup. I made a cross on his tiny hand with a sparkly lip balm. The nurses who were present joined us in the Lord's Prayer. Mike, Jason's father, was raised Methodist. Maria was raised Catholic, and now they were both Lutherans. Jason was placed on so many prayer chains that Mike once told me it was only a matter of time before he received an email prayer request to pray for his own son. I imagined prayers for Jason encircling the world, communicated by emails. Jason's only chance was if he could receive a heart and lung transplant. The problem was that he was having seizures every few hours. The doctors could not stabilize him. On January 23rd, I was working at my desk when a sense of urgency to take care of everything in my in tray and straighten everything on my desktop overcame me. This is rare. I finished everything. I straightened everything. I dusted the top of my desk. Once I left, I drove on 270, the freeway that encircles Columbus, Ohio, for almost 2 hours. I went home, went to bed, tossed and turned. At 3 a.m., I decided to go to Children's Hospital. I was compelled. I went to Children's Hospital and parked where there was one single door. No one was at the door. The door was unlocked. I made my way to the NICU. No one was in Jason's room. I stood by his bed. I looked at the tubes entering every part of his body. I remembered when Jesus said to his disciples, "And you will do greater things than these." Careful not to touch any of the 18 tubes attached to baby Jason, I reached through a hole and I touched his tiny leg and prayed. I prayed that the seizures would stop, that he would become stable enough for the transplant, that he would live, because he was a baby and I was a mother. I sang him a lullaby from our hymnal, "Go, my children, with my blessing," which is to the tune of "All Through the Night." The next morning, his aunt, who lived 3 hours away, sent an email to everyone who was praying for Jason in our area that said she had woke up at 3 a.m. and dropped to her knees in prayer and asked God to make the seizures stop and to send someone to help him. Jason stabilized that very day. 1 week later, on February 1st, I was in a church council meeting. Excuse me. Sitting around a kitchen table in the farmhouse that was the church office when the phone rang. It was Maria, his mother. She said, "We have a donor. We are at the hospital. Come now." When I arrived, I learned that Jason would be receiving both a heart and lungs because his chances of survival were best that way. To give such a tiny baby just lungs was a greater risk, but Jason's heart was healthy. Then I learned that Jason's healthy heart would be transplanted into another baby at the same time, Kayla Richardson. The baby donor would give his heart and lungs to Jason. Jason's heart would be transplanted into baby Kayla. It was called a domino heart transplant, and it would take 12 hours and a team of surgeons and nurses, some of whom would take over partway through. Once they took the two babies into surgery, their parents and I went to the chapel at Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. Around the perimeter of the inside of this chapel are symbols of all the great world religions. On the altar are holy books, the authoritative texts from every religion. The two couples asked me to do a prayer service. I vaguely remember leading them in a meditative prayer in which I asked them to envision God's hands under the surgeon's hands. It would be God holding the surgeons as the surgeons held the babies. We prayed for the family whose baby had died and those who would receive that baby's heart and lungs so their babies could live. Afterward, we went to a special soundproof waiting room with reclining chairs and dim lighting. On each recliner was a soft blanket. To my utter disbelief, all four parents fell asleep and slept soundly. On the other hand, I paced, looked out the window at the city lights, and prayed. One of my prayers was that both babies would make it. I did not know how I would manage two couples in the same space, one with ecstatic relief and one with gut-wrenching despair at the same time. At 7 a.m., 13 hours after the surgery began, the surgeon came to tell us the operation had been successful. Kayla and Jason were the youngest domino transplant recipients ever and are still today. We sat down to wait again in the same room until the babies came out of recovery. At 8 a.m., a work crew came in with saws and sledgehammers. They were scheduled to begin the renovation of the hospital wing we were in that morning. We were barely out the door before they began smashing the soundproofed wall. I remember thinking, this good news was so big that it could not be contained to one soundproof waiting room. The wall had to come down. The news had to spread. After the parents saw their babies, we were ushered into a conference room with a stage and chairs for the two couples. In front of them were reporters from Good Morning America, NBC, ABC, CNN, NPR, and various world news agencies. Word traveled fast. When I returned to the small town of 3,000 people to report the news, they had already heard. All 10 churches in that tiny town were ringing their church bells. The bells continued to ring until noon. I believe I was present for a miracle that night. It was a miracle I did not witness, but one for which I was present all the same. For that surgery to succeed, these two babies and their donor and the qualified surgeons and the hospital that was prepared for such a surgery all had to come together at the exact moment in time. It was one of the defining moments of my life as a pastor. Today, 5,000 people every year are recipients of a heart transplant. The success rate is nearly 90%, and for many, it adds up to 20 years to their life. Matthew's account of the resurrection includes an earthquake and an angel sitting cross-legged atop a rolled-away stone. Jesus has long since left the tomb. No one saw the miracle of his rising from the dead, but the angel and the women who came to the tomb were present all the same. And once the women knew that Jesus' resurrection was a success, word traveled fast. Jesus' resurrection did not stop the horrible things that were happening in Rome. Jesus' disciples would all be killed for their unwillingness to deny the resurrection. Violence and war, famine and abuses of all kinds would continue to live beside miracles and life and the sounds of new life throughout the region. Jesus' resurrection does not just bring the comforting image of eternal life, it transforms the world right now, right here, through us. People who welcome being transformed into someone who can look beyond what is and be called into what can be. Recently, the Hawaiian Islands were devastated by storms. It was barely covered in the news. A friend of mine who lives there wrote this. I'm on Oahu, where we've recently had much bad weather, maybe $1 billion in damages, many areas having flooding. People have lost their homes, their livelihoods, family members. So the usual neighbors helping out neighbors, people donating and so on, kind of resurrection work, but also something I've never seen in a disaster before. The county has been hauling out hundreds of dump trucks of debris with the stated purpose of getting it all out as soon as possible so the people living there don't have the spiritual and emotional stress of looking at it. And because they're doing it quickly, they're piling it all up in a park in a nearby community to begin the long process of separating out metals, plastics, toxic stuff, instead of doing that long work at the disaster site. And the people who live in that community with the park are pretty much, we're happy to give up our park to do this for them. They are not so much looking down at the ruin, but looking up at the dump truck drivers and looking up at the people near the park who are taking away the things that would keep the spirits of those who've lived through the wreckage cast down. And this is but one example of people rising up out of love for their neighbors over and over again. The horrible things that happen in the world do not negate the life that rises up every day. Fear and worry do not redact joy and faith. Desperate parents receive organ transplants. Nonverbal children say their first words. People feed the hungry, care for the poor, listen to the lonely. Teachers and nurses, parents and grandparents, students and chefs perform their duties with care and integrity and compassion. Millions of protesters rise up to say no to hate, no to violence, no to those who want to dominate and destroy life. Millions of neighbors work together to rebuild after hurricanes, to save people and pets from housetops during floods, to take in refugees whose homes and villages were collateral damage in a senseless war. Right now, the Artemis II astronauts are looking down at this world with a new perspective, their hearts moved anew at the beauty from above. Looking down at the earth, Victor Glover, the first black astronaut, noted, "Trust us. You look amazing. You look beautiful from here. We are all one people." The crew, aiming to inspire, described Earth as a single shared home from space. Jason Wolfe lived 2 more years after being the youngest domino transplant patient. Kayla Richardson went to college with Jason's heart beating in her chest. Resurrection was not just a one-time thing. Resurrection happens throughout the world every single day. On this Easter, at a time when we listen to the news with fear and trembling, let us remember that the horrible things in this world do not negate love, continuing to rise against all odds. Even war does not stop people from rising up day after day to love the way Jesus has taught us. Yesterday, Archbishop Hossam Naum of the Anglican Diocese of Jerusalem, which covers much of the Middle East, wrote this: "The resurrection is not a movement from the tomb to life, but the declaration that life has become present within the tomb itself." Today we remember that we are part of a great cloud of witnesses who heard the story of the empty tomb and believed what the angels said. And that belief, the belief that Jesus Christ was crucified, died, buried, and 3 days later rose up from the grave, has transformed our lives and changed our hearts for good. Thank you for listening to Take Off Your Shoes. Let me send you out now with this blessing. May God give you the grace never to sell yourself short, grace to risk something big for something good, and grace to remember the world is now too dangerous for anything but the truth and too small for anything but love.